Hello everyone and welcome to episode 18 of Runetalker. I'm Maitland, joined as always by Simon.
Hey everyone.
And we've got a fun ep planned for this week. We are going to dive into Expeditions, Runeterra's version of limited play, which is something that we've both enjoyed a lot in other card games, and we both really enjoy Runeterra's implementation of it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting format. It's definitely a breath of fresh air if you start getting bored with Constructed. And it's also one of the best ways in the game to build your collection. And the higher your win rate is, the faster you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll start off talking a bit about what's happening in the meta at the moment and some of the new decks we're seeing pop up. And then we will move into discussing expeditions, and we'll talk about expeditions at a higher level and some of our sort of philosophies and how we approach them, and get into a bit more detail. And then we are going to attempt to do a draft over the cast, and we'll see how that works. And so hopefully you get some value from this. Let us know if you are interested in expedition content. This is the first time we've tried that, so we'll see what people think about it.
Yeah, hopefully it goes well.
All right, so the new meta, I think we're seeing about as much Aphelios as we had both expected.
Yeah, I have not seen the deck even once, so it's very disappointing, but I guess that's what happens when you make a nerf like that.
Yeah, the commentary I've seen from people has just been that that as they play with Aphelios, it just dawned on them how terrible he is, and which is, I think what we were saying in our last step was that if you think that he's going to be okay, that I think very quickly playing with him, you'll just realize how much he really has slowed down. And that's unfortunate, but oh well, here we are. What we have seen a gigantic rise in has been aggro decks. And so Spider aggro has really, really taken over the meta at all ranks and tiers with pretty ludicrously strong win rates, especially, it's a very cheap deck as well. So that means that it gets picked up a lot, and it's just, I think it is absolutely bonkers at the moment, and wouldn't be surprised if, does it need a nerf? I don't know. I mean, when I queue up at the moment, my first port of call is, do I beat Spider aggro? And there's just not many decks that do that at the moment, and if you do it, there's especially not ways to do it that don't just make you an absolute dog to every other deck in the format.
Yeah, definitely. It's this really weird metagame at the moment, actually, where, some of the best ways to, beat aggro are by playing other aggro decks that happen to be good in the aggro mirror. So it's weird sort of seeing the meta shift around that and seeing people, try to beat each other with spiders or discard aggro, or, Nightfall aggro has really made a big comeback because it's preying on the spiders deck. So it's interesting to see what's happening here, particularly because this is the patch that the next seasonals is going to be played on. So we'll definitely talk about that a bit more when we get closer to that tournament. But I don't think I've seen aggro this strong since before Go Hard was printed, when, Pirate aggro was dominating the meta for a while and then got hit with some nerfs. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah. For the first seasonal, the strategy that I was trying to employ was to target aggro, particularly discard aggro at the time, with 3 decks, and discard aggro was pretty good in that meta, but this meta is just like you said, Spider aggro, Nightfall aggro, Pirate aggro, and discard aggro are all very heavily played, very strong win rates, even at really high elos. And so there's probably going to be a lot of those at seasonal as well. And can you put together 3 decks that can beat Spider aggro? I don't know if that's really, it's not very easy to do at the moment, that's for sure. But maybe in a seasonal sort of format, it becomes easier to do that when you're not having to face against necessarily a bunch of other random decks as well. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I think it definitely could become, easier. You could really build some, Targon Demacia shells that run a bunch of, Radiant Guardians, Solari Sun Forges, strong early blockers, a bunch of the life gain cards, which, wouldn't be a great ladder deck, but if you're expecting a lot of aggro, that's something that you could, build into your lineup as well. So I've definitely seen some interesting decks from previous seasonals. So I think it would reward some clever deck builders to put some of those things together, but we'll have to see closer to the tournament if aggro is still as present. And honestly, at the same time, you don't necessarily have to be able to beat a deck in a tournament if you can ban the deck in the tournament. So, not being able to beat Spiderburn might not be a problem if you queue into Spiderburn, you just ban it, and you get to move on with your life. But at the same time, if your opponent's running 3 aggro decks that are sort of similar to that Spider package, then, that ban strategy is not going to work. And if you go for something like that, and a lot of people do bring a triple aggro lineup, you are just going to get destroyed. So I think it adds some interesting wrinkles to the metagame for the next seasonal.
Yeah, absolutely. And building a triple aggro lineup has never been more appealing, really, with how strong and diverse and without the aggro decks at the moment don't really overlap much, so you can do it quite easily and have decks that have very high win rates on the ladder and very similar matchups, and so you've got quite a realistically good lineup. Some of the other decks that people are playing a lot that I would probably caution against, like Deep. Deep is seeing a lot of play, and its win rate is not very impressive. So I think that just shows that people love playing Deep, even if it's not necessarily good for them.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those decks that people just love. It's got a big following, so it's a good time to be a Deep player, but still not busted.
Yeah, Lee Sin as well. Like, there was a lot of hype about Lee Sin coming into this patch, and Lee Sin is getting played a hell of a lot this patch, and people are winning very close to the same amount of games they're losing, and so I'm not sure if I'd advise people to keep bashing Lee Sin on ladder, but it's clearly another one that people love.
Yeah, I think Lee as well traditionally has had a rough aggro matchup. I think it got a bit better when Sparklefly was printed, but it's still, not great, not what you want to be seeing. And I don't know, at the same time, Lee Sin is one of those decks where, like, the best Lee Sin players are so much better than the rest of the Lee Sin players that just looking at everybody's win rate together, might not show how good the deck actually is. But at the same time, if you're not someone who has jammed infinite Lee Sin games, then that win rate should, push you away from the deck, because you're probably not one of those players who is going to have that insane win rate with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And same with Deep. Like, if you're playing Deep and you've got a really good win rate, then by all means keep doing it. But I would just, wary people against it, particularly if you are already playing it with a huge win rate. One of the old pillars of the format, TF Fizz, there was a lot of talk. I still see a lot of talk about TF Fizz still being great now, but I just don't see it being backed up by the data. If I'm looking at the moment for Plat and above worldwide for the last 3 days, and TF Fizz has a 45.3% win rate, which is, probably what I'd expect from it. What are your thoughts on post-nerf TF Fizz?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a couple of things. So obviously the nerf has hit it pretty hard. There were some pretty sizable nerfs on multiple cards. But at the same time, that's another deck that was traditionally quite weak to aggro. And with the amount of aggro that's getting played at the moment, I'm not surprised that its win rate has dropped off. And, the deck only got nerfed a week ago. People are probably playing basically the same list instead of looking for different innovations or way to maybe tune the deck or change the strategy slightly, which could help to bump up the win rate. But that being said, I definitely don't think it's a, busted deck, and I think the nerfs were very effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that's cropped up that surprised both of us, I think, is that Fiora, rest in peace, she's moved on. Haven't seen any Fioras.
I miss you, Fiora.
This patch, but Jarvan has come out of nowhere to replace Fiora in Shen's heart, and is doing so with a very reasonable win rate. So that's quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to give that deck a go. I haven't really, had a chance to play with it yet, but I'm surprised that, just swapping the champion out has led to the deck still being, pretty playable and good. And I guess that just goes to show that sometimes the shell can, be just as important as the champions, even though the champions are often the splashiest, most in-your-face part.
Yeah, you know what I think it really shows is what I was saying, that the win condition part of Fiora was a big part of, I think, why it got nerfed, because it's really feel bad and people really don't like it. But I don't think it was really moving the needle on how strong Fiora was. I think just the body, the 3/3 challenger body that then has an inbuilt way to get a +1/+1, I think was a huge portion of Fiora's power. And the win condition part of it, what you've actually got to look at there is how many games where you won by Fiora win condition were you not winning anyway just through normal damage and board control. And I think that the delta there is much smaller than most people might think.
Yeah, definitely. In most matchups, 100%. But there was certainly some matchups where, your Fiora wins were just, popping off. But yeah, at the same time as well with Fiora, I think a lot of the power of the win condition was sort of hidden as well. So it wasn't necessarily you'd win the game with that condition, but the threat of it would make your opponent have to make some weird plays they otherwise might not want to, or not develop the units that they want to. So yeah, it was an interesting ability, and I'm still not a huge fan of this nerf making Fiora a 3/2. I kind of hope they would do something else to address some of those issues without sort of killing her power as just an efficient challenger unit. But we'll see where she goes from here.
Yeah, I think my favorite deck for ladder at the moment is still Nasus Thresh. I think that deck it's got a pretty good matchup into the aggressive decks, and I just really like the play patterns for that deck. I think it's quite interesting. It's sort of a very, at least I play it as a very sort of controlling deck with a combo kill finish of Thresh finding Nasus and Nasus just doing the full 20. And so I really enjoy playing that deck, and I like having access to Rite of Negation as well. And yeah, I think it's just a sweet deck, and it's doing well on the ladder at the moment, and it'd be quite a powerful inclusion for the seasonal.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I think for the ladder at the moment, either, playing aggro, playing something that beats aggro, or, playing one of those mid-range decks that, beats the anti-aggro lists, like you've said, like the Thresh Nasus can do that quite well. So a few different options to keep the ladder fresh for a little while going forward.
Yeah, and one of the other new options that it's not new to the meta, but it is new to winning games is Vladimir Braum.
Oh, it's got a positive win rate now?
Yeah, it's at 55% for the last 3 days. It's
popping off.
Yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Because I played a bit of this deck, and I still just, I don't know, I definitely think that I'm not playing it as well as I play other decks. I don't know if I need to just be mulling for the landmark more, or what's going on exactly, but it hasn't been, I don't know, I haven't been feeling it with this one.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those decks that, I don't know, some matchups just don't feel that good, or the games you win, you'll win them sort of by the skin of your teeth. So personally, I don't love playing that style of deck. I think it sort of reminds me of the Overwhelm lists in that way, where I don't know, some games you just absolutely crush, but most of the games that you win feel pretty close, and you only just sort of get there.
Yeah. And that's I've always gravitated towards control decks in card games, and that's exactly why, is because it's a big mental thing for me where when you win games with control decks, you turn the corner at some point, right, against an aggro deck, for example. They pressure you for the first 5 turns, and then you have lasted, and then you start to pull further ahead, and it's very hard to fall back and lose from those scenarios, and so you end up winning the game and feeling like you're winning the game for 5 to 6 turns, which is that's a lot of feeling like you're winning the game, as opposed to playing the Braum decks or the Overwhelm decks where everything's on a knife's edge, and you feel like you could win or lose at any second, and then it just happens and you win. And then it's done, and you go on to the next game. So you're just sort of still cooling down, as opposed to just having a nice long period where you're winning and everything feels great.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's most of the sort of decks in the meta at the moment that I wanted to talk about. I do think that it's probably worth having a bit of a look and a think about the data when you're coming to ladder at the moment, because there's more often than I've basically ever seen in Runeterra's history is there are decks being played a really high amount that have very mediocre win rates. Typically, people gravitate towards the good decks, and they play decks that are good and you see the highest played decks have really good win rates. And yeah, this patch more than any other, I think, there's some decks with 50% or below in the top 5 most played decks. And so I'd just sort of say, have a good, honest think about the decks you're playing and the meta you're playing against, and are you setting yourself up to succeed on the ladder with your deck choice?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice. And honestly, yeah, over the next week, I think everything's going to settle down a bit more. The cream is going to rise to the top, and we're going to see what's really good. And we can start sort of planning for the seasonal. So spend the next sort of week just, really looking at the decks you're playing, deciding, is this actually good? And start thinking about maybe some seasonal choices or last chance gauntlet choices if that's something that you're going for this season.
Yeah, and either play Spider Aggro or have some sort of plan against it, I think, is probably my advice in the moment, because that deck is, I've been saying it since day one of this patch, that Spider Aggro is just busted, and it hasn't gotten any worse.
Yeah, it definitely hasn't. It definitely hasn't.
All right, shall we move on to discuss expeditions?
Let's do it.
All right, so expeditions, as we said in the intro, is the way to play limited in Runeterra. And so when you do an expedition, you go through 15 rounds of picks where you're offered 3 different buckets that have 3 cards in them, and you pick a bucket of cards to put in your deck. And then as you start to pick more cards, that affects which regions and which buckets you'll see more often cropping up. And then at the end of it, you have a deck and you play through, and each round you play, you get to either add more cards to your deck or do some swaps, get to trade cards out for other cards, which is really, really powerful. You play everything that you get, but you have opportunities to remove some of those cards, and sort of improve your deck each round with the goal of getting to 7 wins. If you lose 2 matches in a row, you're out, and you only get 1 chance to get the 7th win. And as Simon said, it's a great way to unlock a lot of cards. The rewards are really generous, and you get a free expedition token each week from the vault if you get to level 10, I think. And so you can do a lot of expeditions. You get 2 tries for 1 token, which is a really good value. And so that's basically how they work. And so I guess when you are queuing up for an expedition, Simon, what are some of the things that you're thinking about, particularly, the first 2 stages? The first 2 picks you make always include a champion. And so what are some of the things you're thinking about there?
Yeah, definitely. So the first 2 picks are sort of the most important. They set the stage. You're, reliably going to get offered cards from those regions. You also get sort of the most powerful cards into your deck are going to be your champions a lot of the time. And you get to make a few different choices when you're picking a champion. So, there's sort of a general strategy to picking a champion. So what makes a certain champion good? And the way I like to think about it is, I'm either picking the champion because it's really good by itself. So, a card like Garen, for instance, 5/5 regenerate, pretty good body. It costs 5 mana. It's got a lot of stats, a decent ability. It's pretty easy to level up when there's less removal around. So all in all, Garen, pretty solid champion by himself. But what other decisions am I making by picking Garen? Well, Garen comes with 2 other cards when he's offered to me. So how good are those cards compared to the other cards being offered with champions? And then also, Garen exists in Demacia. So by picking Garen, I'm going to get offered Demacia cards going forward. So part of my decision isn't just about how good Garen is, but how good is Demacia? Am I happy to be offered these cards going forward? And the third way I like to look at a champion is, how good is this champion in sort of a synergy-driven list? So I think the best example of this in Expedition is Teemo. So Teemo, by itself, a 1/1 elusive that puts 5 mushrooms into the opponent's deck when it hits. Just not that good, not that powerful by itself. It's in Piltover and Zorn, which is like not of the best regions in Expedition. It tends to be quite weak. So looking at those two variables, you'd think, oh yeah, you sort of never pick Teemo. But I think Teemo's actually pretty decent. And the reason is Teemo has really strong synergy. And if you build a deck around him, you can get massively rewarded. So those are sort of the three different things that I look at when I'm, picking my champion.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about synergy. Synergy is something in expeditions that I typically heavily try to avoid. I find that it just can be quite inconsistent. I think Shadow Isles is a really good point of this, as we both don't particularly like Shadow Isles as a region, and that's because historically it has been very synergy based. There's been a lot of synergies around ephemeral units, and ephemeral units are typically just very bad if you don't have all of that synergy, and even then, they can still be quite bad. Synergy around sacrificing your own cards, which is also not really inherently strong in and of itself. And so, yeah, synergy is one that I try to be quite wary of when I'm picking. I try to look at buckets and cards in terms of, sometimes I will just go all in on a synergy, but more often than not, that's just to have fun, and it doesn't work out. If I'm drafting well to try and win, typically what I'm just looking at is, how good are these cards essentially in a vacuum, and then comparing that to what do I already have picked in my deck, and what holes am I trying to fill in this deck.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Honestly, yeah, I don't rate one thing, which is true in sort of all card games when it comes to limited formats, and Runeterra is no exception, is that, it's really hard to like an archetype. So a lot of the time, because you're offered random cards, and sometimes you're not going to get cards that go into that archetype, it's really hard to draft a very good aggro deck. It's just hard to get enough 1-drops, of 2-drops to be able to sort of consistently curve out. And it's also really hard to play a really good control deck that's really focused on that. It's got the sort of sweepers and removal. It's got, good ratios for those spells compared to its finishers. So a lot of the time you end up sort of being offered cards from each end of the spectrum. So most decks you end up drafting end up being more sort of mid-range decks that sort of do a little bit of each but land sort of somewhere in the middle. And a lot of your decks are going to end up that way, and a lot of your opponent's decks are going to end up that way. So keeping that in mind when you're drafting and thinking more about, how can I beat a mid-range deck with an aggressive slant or a mid-range deck with a controlling slant is something that will help you when you need to pick cards during the draft portion.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I think about a lot, especially because, as we said, it's set up where you've got 3 buckets of 3 cards, is you're constantly doing, and when we go through the draft that we're going to do, you'll see us do a lot of this. You're doing a lot of weighing up of buckets that have, say, 2 cards that are okay and 1 card. Just
to clarify on the buckets. So that every champion bucket you get has 2 random cards and a champion, but each bucket after that only has 2 cards.
Do they only have 2 cards?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, looking at a bucket that has 1 good card and 1 mediocre card versus a bucket that has 2 okay cards, how do you compare those is very interesting. And the one that I'm often thinking about the most is because you really don't want to have bad cards in your deck, because you can't remove them unless they happen to come up for a swap, and so you can end up being stuck with them, and they can be quite detrimental. But at the same time, there are some really powerful cards that get offered to you, and so sometimes it is worth taking a really powerful card and just living with the fact that you get a dud. But that's I think that's sort of the most common decision for me, is trying to figure out if I'm willing to take a bad card to go into my deck.
Yeah, I 100% agree. A lot of the time, I am a lot more focused on just not putting bad cards into my deck when I can avoid it. Particularly because once you end up with multiple bad cards, it just adds a lot of inconsistency to your deck. So one way that I like to think about it is sort of putting a number value on a card. So sometimes you might see a card and you might think, oh yeah, this, Solari Priestess is a 9. So it would be really strong. I'd like it a lot in my deck. It hits this really good spot in the curve, but it also comes with this, completely
Stellar Corn.
unplayable. Yeah, Stellar Corn. This 3-drop that's a 1/2 lifelink. It doesn't really do anything. I was listing its stat line, but it is a 1 or a 2 in the number evaluation as well. So just keep that in mind that it's not a great card. And in general, if I do get offered a bucket like that where, I've got a 1 and a 9, and then there's another bucket which has a 5 and a 6, I'm probably going to pick that bucket with a 5 and a 6 a lot of the time.
Yeah. And some of the times I really get swung are when epics show up in the packs. There's some really powerful epics that you don't see very often. Epics are quite rare in expeditions, so that can really swing me. And also, when I'm looking for key pieces for my deck, so it might be a key spot on my curve that I really need a unit, or just a unit that's really powerful in my deck. So I draft Demacia a lot. I think Demacia is very good, and Radiant Guardian is an incredibly powerful card in Demacia, and so I often take packs that have whatever the 3 mana spell that gives your units Challenger for the turns.
Oh yeah, God, yeah, that sucks.
Sometimes I'm forced to take that because I want to have a Radiant Guardian or a similarly high power unit in my deck.
Yeah, so it can definitely be right to do it, but just being aware of that is useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of talked a bit about Demacia. So one of the reasons I really like Demacia is exactly what Simon was saying before about how you end up being quite mid-range focused a lot, and that's a really strong place to be because if you try and hone in on going very aggressive or very controlling, then you just have a lot more opportunities for you not to get the right off of the right cards and just end up with a very clunky deck. Whereas if you aim to go mid-range, it's quite easy to sort of fill those gaps and build out a deck that just aims to play reasonable creatures every turn and have some removal, have some tricks, and hopefully overwhelm your opponent. And Demacia, I find, has very good statted creatures. It has very powerful champions that fit with those strategies. You've got Garen, as Simon said. You've got Shyvana, was I thought pretty good before in expeditions and is even better now. And so you can use those champions. Fiora's obviously
was quite good, yeah.
Yeah, was quite good. Lux can be quite good as well. And so you can take those champions and just take some. You've got a lot of really powerful combat tricks to use and some powerful supporting spells and stuff. But it's just got all the tools, and I find that apart from those spells that give Challenger, the other ones that really stick out to me as stinkers that I have to take sometimes. But apart from that, you've got really solid creatures at a lot of the spots in the curve. Screeching Dragon is an absolute all-star in Limited, and so Demacia is one of, if not my favorite archetype to go, region to go in expeditions, and has been for quite a while.
Yeah, I think Demacia is really strong. Stats are just very important, and Demacia often gives really good stats for mana cost, which definitely adds up when most of the cards that you're playing are Demacia. And, removal isn't that good in Legends of Runeterra. And, that rings true for Expedition as well. So if you can get a Challenger into play, that's a really good way to make up for having poor removal. And also, if your opponents have poor removal and you stick a Challenger like Screeching Dragon, it can really get out of control quickly, especially because you have a lot of pump spells and sort of ways to protect your challenges. So keep that in mind. One other thing to keep in mind as well that we didn't mention yet is there are certain archetypes. So just because you are in Demacia doesn't mean you're going to get the exact same Demacia cards as somebody else in Demacia. So if you have a Garen and somebody else takes a Fiora, you're each going to be offered cards that synergize well with that champion. So that often means when you pick Shyvana, you're going to get more opportunities to pick up dragons. And when you get, Fiora, it's probably going to give you more cards that help you to protect Fiora. So just keep that in mind as well. And if you're new to expeditions, don't really worry about that too much. But if you're an intermediate player and want to improve, starting to think about those sort of combinations and which cards am I actually signing up for here is a really good way to work on your game.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Simon said, the fact that removal spells aren't that powerful in Runeterra in general means inherently the combat tricks are much more powerful. And if you've got good creatures, then you can make better use of your combat tricks, especially if you've got good units with Challenger. You can force your opponent into those situations. And so, yeah, I find that Demacia just works really well in and of itself. Mono Demacia is quite good as well because you get to go Bannerman, which is incredibly strong if you can pick up a number of those. And it also just pairs well with a lot of different regions. So, yeah, pretty much always happy to see that. I know one of the regions that's one of your favorites, if not your favorite, is Targon, and has been for quite a while. Obviously, it got a nerf at some point, purely an expedition nerf, right, where the buckets for Leona got adjusted, which hit her really hard. She was unbeatable for a long time, so that was rough. But I think that Targon's still definitely one of my favorites. What is it about Targon that you like so much?
I think Targon just hits on a few different angles that are really, really powerful in Expedition. So I think it was the best region in Expedition pretty much since it was released. Maybe when just after Soraka came out, it did take a bit of a hit, but they fixed some of the buckets after that. But
unrelated.
yeah. But then I think Aphelios coming out, I think Veiled Temple was like one of the best Expedition cards. So now that that's gotten a nerf, it's a little bit worse. I think Aphelios was maybe the best or one of the best champions as well. So that nerf's definitely hit them. But I mean, Targon just does so many things that are really powerful in Expedition. So one of the things that Targon does really well is just having a lot of decent 1 and 2 drop units that can be quite important against aggressive opponents. So you could just end up in this position where you get Solari Soldier and Solari Shield Bearer into your deck, which, are a 3/3 and a 3/6 the turn you play them. And those are just insane aggressive options and also the best possible defensive options for their mana cost. So it allows you to pivot quite well. You also just end up with some insane value of invoke cards. So things like Moondreamer, which allow you to invoke a random card, Solari Priestess, Lunari Priestess, all these cards that just give you these expensive late game value cards. Like some of those cards are just absolutely unbeatable, and being able to end up with a card like Fallen Comet in your hand in an Expedition is just so strong, where, removal's already really bad and you just end up with one of the best possible removal spells. So I think Targon's ability to pivot while also having, a bunch of different synergies that make them quite powerful. So for instance, you can end up in a Nightfall deck and there are a lot of strong options there. You can end up in a Leona Daybreak deck, which is very strong. Or you can end up, with Aurelion Soul and suddenly you're, playing a Dragon's deck and leaning into that aspect. So I think that flexibility is part of what makes Targon so strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to generate those Celestial cards is a big part of what gives them that flexibility as well. And it was weird that you didn't mention the Sky's Descent, because that's obviously a really crucial part of what makes Targon powerful in Expeditions.
I've still never played with it in Expedition.
Are you serious? I've played so many.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
I just never get offered epics. Never gets played against me. Like
you're really missing your trick there. I'd definitely get involved. But yeah.
Oh well, it just hasn't been offered.
Yeah, I really like as well the flexibility of Targon, like you said. With Demacia, you are going to be a mid-range creature-based deck, and that's just all there is to it. But with Targon, you can skew more aggressive. You can go more late game with Aurelion Soul. You can go really Daybreak focused or really Nightfall focused. There are a lot of different options there, and they're all quite good. And having the opportunity to sort of move between them is really powerful, like you said. Yeah.
And Zoe's great as well as a champion. So you just get a lot of good, like they're just good champions. You get offered good cards, and if it's not working, let's say you end up with a Leona and you're like, oh no, I'm not getting offered these good Daybreak cards. Well, you're probably getting offered good Nightfall cards or, good Invoke cards. So you've sort of got that way out, where if you go into a strategy that's a little more all in, you can really get punished.
Yeah, and that's again the real problem I find with some of the synergy-based decks like Fishbones, for example, which is a Bilgewater centric, Bilgewater and Piltover centric strategy around buffing up 1-drops, and your theme is around 1-drops, and I've definitely played against people that have had just absolutely bonkers fishbones decks, and I've tried to draft, after getting destroyed, I've tried to draft myself, but I just find that too often you end up having to take buckets that just don't have powerful cards because, Bilgewater and Piltover and Zorn are not regions that I think are particularly strong at the moment in expeditions. And so if you get offered a heap of the good one-drops and the good enablers, then you're good. But as soon as you start to miss, it's not like you're with Targon where you're just getting other generically good cards. Every card you get essentially that isn't a one-drop or makes your one-drops better is just not helping you win the game. And so that's, I think, a good example about why I don't really like the synergy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You just take on so much more risk when you go for some of those synergy picks. And a lot of the time, the payoff just, isn't really there. I think another good example of that is Soraka and playing with, Star Spring when it gets offered to you. You take on so much risk by picking that up. And
just never do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can try it for fun, but Maitland has sent me so many screenshots where his first champion he takes is Tahm Kench, and he's like, all right, next up I'm going to get offered a Soraka with a Star Spring and we're good to go. And then he just doesn't. And his draft is over. It's definitely rough. And yeah, the thing of it is, even if Soraka was in that next pack, that's just not even that good.
I've never lost an expedition game to Soraka.
Yeah, honestly, I've never lost to a Star Spring. Obviously, it's cool and it adds some variety and it can be interesting, but at the same time, if you are playing to win or you want to, fast track your collection building, you don't have that many shots, you're a free-to-play player, then yeah, I think it is useful to avoid those sorts of synergies for the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Freljord is another region that I quite like. It's sort of flexible like Targon. I quite like sometimes doing the ramp decks. There was a while, I haven't got it in as much recently. I think they might have changed the buckets or something where I was getting Feel the Rush quite reasonably consistently, and I think that is an incredibly powerful card in Limited, and you're able to get a couple of ramp spells, become a bit more controlling, and just build around resolving Feel the Rush. And I was keeping Feel the Rush in my opener whenever I have it. I think that's just a really powerful strategy, and Freljord lets you do that. And it's also just got some good combat tricks. Troll Chant's really powerful. It's got some pretty reasonable mid-rangey units, and so I think it pairs pretty well with Demacia and some of the mid-range colours, and it just gives you a bit of flexibility whilst offering a bunch of pretty reasonable units and spells.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's definitely got the best combat tricks, especially just the amount of good combat tricks as well. You're pretty likely to end up with, Brittle Steels or, like you said, Troll Chant gets offered a fair bit.
Battle Fury.
Then, yeah, a lot of the freeze spells. You just end up with a lot of very efficient combat tricks, which are pretty useful because a lot of the units at least the early game units in Freljord tend to be quite weak or understated. So that's a lot of the time where those decks tend to fall down in Expedition. But you can end up with some very successful decks building around Ash. Sejuani is another pretty strong mid-range champion. And then, Trundle and Tryndamere aren't too bad, and Nivea is playable as well, so you do have...
Yeah.
No?
I'm not big on Nivea.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair enough, honestly. But yeah, Ash and Sedge are definitely the best two champions in Freljord, and I think Ash is the best by a decent bit. Just because,
really?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm pretty medium on Ash. I think Sejuani's brilliant.
Really? Okay.
I don't see Ash much at all, playing with or against her. So,
I think I've had a fair bit of success with Ash, and I've definitely lost games where I'm like, there's no way I can lose to them just playing a flipped Ash, and just building around that Frostbite. And I think Ash, along with Rhymetusk Wolf, I think it's called, the 3/2 that if it Rhymefang Wolf, if it challenges, if it strikes a unit with 0 power, it kills it. So I think if you compare Rhymefang Wolf with Ash, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you can ever set up that combo of Rhymetusk Shaman, which at round start frostbites an enemy, you just turbo flip Ash, you just set up these ridiculous Rhymefang Wolf plays.
Yeah, Shaman's really good.
Yeah, so that's why I'm so high on Ash, but Sedge is definitely another good Freljord champion.
Yes, some of the regions that I'm less keen on, Bilgewater. I'm not a big fan of Bilgewater. I think that's probably a big part of that is I don't really like the champions from Bilgewater, and they do have some of the more synergy based things. They've got quite a lot more aggressive cards, and yeah, I just feel like I do not play Bilgewater much at all. Do you go Bilgewater often?
Not super often. I think Twisted Fate can be pretty good. It's just like a strong, like mid-range threat. I think Gangplank has got like really good stats. Like Gangplank just as a champion in another region would be like really good. Misfortune is pretty decent, but Nautilus and Tahm Kench I've picked, once and then realized I probably shouldn't do this anymore. Yeah. And then I've picked up Fizz before if I'm really trying to go for Fishbones. So normally that'll happen if I pick a Teemo and then the next best champion I'm offered is a Fizz. I'll pick up a Fizz, but otherwise I'm not really playing Bilgewater that much.
Yeah, you've got a lot of very synergy-based cards, and then like if you look at the buckets that Gangplank's in, there's barely any units there. It's like a lot of spells, and the spells are just not very strong. And so, yeah, Gangplank's definitely the strongest champion, I think, in that region, and the most generically sort of strong. But even then, I just feel like the supporting cast just doesn't bring enough to the table for you to want to, and same with Twisted Fate, to be in there. So
for sure. And I think a big part of that is like artificial as well, because it's like Riot have chosen, like one of the big archetypes in Bilgewater is supposed to be about, mega kegs, getting a lot of powder kegs into play and then using these spells to get, value or whatever. But the powder keg cards kind of suck, and so do the like spells. You're not really getting like big value out of either end of it.
And they're also just very easy to remove.
Yeah, they're just like super, super fragile, and then the payoff just isn't that good. And, a lot of that is, Riot can massively balance Expedition just by changing some of the cards that are in the buckets, which, obviously they can't do for Constructed, but that's also like that next layer of this is bad for this reason instead of, this is just generically bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that there might be some things that we say that regions are, if you're not familiar with expeditions that are bad, that you think are strong and constructed. But yeah, the fact that Riot does artificially adjust and control the pool definitely affects how strong those regions are. Although I do think it'll be the surprise for no one that we're not big fans of Ionia as well, which is pretty similar to similar issues to constructed, where just the creatures aren't very strong. You rely a lot on synergy, really, and the synergy's not even really there. Even if you get the nuts decks, I don't really think you've just got a lot of unimpressive creatures, and your champions as well. Sometimes you can get good Lee Sin. I've definitely had good Lee Sin decks, and I really like going for good Lee Sin decks, but it's not something that I'd be doing if I was really trying to win games. Just because the units and even the spells sometimes are just not as strong as you need to compete with some of the stronger regions.
Yeah, exactly. One thing to note is the elusives, the cheap elusives, are a lot better in Expedition than they are in Constructed, just because they're less likely to sort of get eaten up, by an avalanche or anything like that. And it can be a lot easier to sort of race your opponent and get multiple hits in with a Green Glade duo, for instance, or even the 2/2 elusive that you have to return a unit to your hand to play. Like, those cards are a lot better in Expedition than they might otherwise be. So, if you are offered them, feel free to pick them up. They'll be pretty strong.
Yeah, I do think that moving on to Noxus, I think Noxus actually is a region I don't mind, and it's very aggressive. And if I go Noxus, I'm going very aggressive, but it has a really good base of aggressive creatures and spells, and the champions are really strong as well. And I just do think that it's not like, you're looking for synergy, but it has the redundancy there, which some of the other synergy sort of regions and packs don't have.
Yeah, agreed. I think Noxus has also just gotten better as well. So the most recent releases are LeBlanc and Riven, and the cards that come along with them are all like pretty good in Expedition. So that's sort of helping you out there as well. I think taking a Draven, I think Draven's really good. I think LeBlanc is pretty good. I think Riven's pretty good.
I really like Darius.
Is pretty good. Yeah. Like they're all strong, and the support around them is pretty good and has recently improved. But I would definitely aim to be aggressive. You can still obviously be mid-range slanted. You probably will have to be, but at the same time, definitely lean more aggressively. And cards like Thorn of the Rose that were added recently can be super threatening, like a 5/1 for 3 mana that lets you stun one of their units. Like I had an opponent play one of those, and it just like completely. I was just going to play like my good 3-drop for the turn, but if I did that, suddenly I'm taking 9 damage if they decide to play their Guile or whatever. So just those sorts of cards, and also on blocks that's going to trade for my Garen for instance. So it gives them some flexibility there, but overall quite an aggressive region.
Yeah, I've been doing Noxus, actually one of my most drafted regions since LeBlanc came out, and for the reasons you said, I think it is just really, really strong. It got a lot of really good cards in the patch. It also just got that buff on the unit that gets cheaper when you get Reputation, so I think that's a good improvement as well.
That's a Shurima card.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. But like Whispered Words and some of those other new Reputation cards are just... I think Noxus is... You're still sort of mid-rangey, but you skew more aggressive, and you can skew even more aggressive depending on what you get offered.
Yeah, definitely. You've got a little bit of flexibility there, but I think going aggro with with Noxus is the right way to go. And also, if you're going to be, going for an aggro deck, I think Noxus is the most reliable way for you to do that.
Yeah. Piltover and Zorn, I find that if I'm going Piltover and Zorn, I'm trying to have fun. I'm like trying to go all in on a Shroom deck or all in on one of the other. Actually, Victor's one that I really like Victor in Expeditions. I know we were just looking at tier lists that said Victor sucked, but I think he was a big boon to Piltover and Zorn, and I definitely go out of my way to go into Victor because I just think that he is very strong and as a mid-range threat.
Yeah, I think Victor can just snowball out of control, and then I think some of the cards that go along with Victor are pretty strong. The Ballistic Bot, for instance, is really good. Iterative Improvement is quite strong. The fact that you can copy your opponent's units as well is really good. I've definitely had games where my opponent plays a Screeching Dragon, I copy it and eat their Screeching Dragon. So, it's a strong card. Mystic Shot is obviously a pretty decent card as well. Generally, if I'm playing Piltover and Zorn, if I'm playing mostly Piltover and Zorn cards, I'm playing a Teemo deck. I'm building around Teemo, and that can be really strong. If you are going to build around Teemo, you just have to commit to taking every copy of Teemo in your next champion pools that you see, and just making sure that you're picking things like Puffcat Peddler higher than every other card, and really going all in on that strategy. Otherwise, I'm playing Jinx usually as a support champion because she's a reasonable threat, and she's also, she's got pretty good stats. Just a 4/3 quick attack for 4 is pretty strong. And like you said, Victor's really good. Otherwise, I'm not really playing any of the other champions in PNZ.
Yeah, I go Teemo a bit, but I don't know, it just never works out for me. I'm not a big fan. But Victor I do really... Like Armed Gearhead, I think is another... That's the one, right, that gets bigger. Armed Gearhead, I think, is incredibly strong. I've had a lot of decks with just a bunch of Armed Gearheads, a bunch of Ballistic Bots, and you just generate a heap of cards. You flip Victor really easily. It combines well with Riven as well. I just think that the Assembly Bot's really strong. Nyandroid is really good. You've just got... It's sort of synergy, but you've got... the buckets are set up in a way that I find that I get the pieces that I need, and I can put very strong decks together.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely... For a little while, it was basically an unplayable region, but I think it's looking a bit better at the moment.
Victor's really brought me around.
Yeah.
Shadow Isles was sort of talked about a bit. I don't know if you had anything more to add to there. I know that you think Kindred has made it a lot better. I haven't seen Kindred much yet, though, but I just find it's a bit too synergy with some clunky cards in there.
I just think Kindred is just really strong by herself, and I do think some of the cards that came along with the Kindred release are just really good in Expedition as well. Like, Fading Icon is a really good 2-drop that pairs well with the deck. If you end up getting the 4-1, the Spirit Leech, that lets you kill an ally to draw 2 cards, I think that helps out a lot with the strategy as well. And if you pair with Shurima, you've got the 0 mana Right that lets you sacrifice units to go and find your champions and can make those strategies a lot more consistent and actually give you a good sort of way to slay your own units. I think Callista has improved for the same reason. You know, those cards synergize really well with Callista. And if you are playing Callista, I think like the sickest Callista decks I've seen are like Rekindler decks, where your Rekindler's died, you flipped your Callista. Every time Callista attacks, you bring back a Rekindler, which summons a new Callista for you. So definitely keep that in mind if you end up on that train. But I think that the Rekindler might be offered pretty high in those buckets, because I see that quite a bit when I play against Callista as well.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, the strongest and my favourite thing to do in Shadow Isles is to get Rekindler decks. It's just, yeah, tough to get them in ways where you don't end up with either a heap of cards that want you to be sacrificing them, or cards that do the sacrificing without having the right amount of the other. But yeah, Rekindler is an incredibly powerful card if you can get a strategy that utilises it well. And so the last region is Shurima. Shurima's one that I drafted a lot when it came out because it's the new region, and that's a lot of fun. It hasn't impressed me as much as I'd sort of hoped. I think that Rampaging Back Eye, similar to Constructed, is just not easy to trigger as we'd expected, and so it makes it a bit tough to use. You've got some clunky spells. You've got some really good spells, like Exhaust is fantastic. Rockhopper's a solid unit, but I don't know. It just hasn't been playing out for me as well as I think I'd hope. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the buckets need a bit of work. So
yeah.
Most of the champions on the face of it are pretty strong by themselves. So the only ones that are kind of weak by themselves are, Talia is just really bad. Like, I've not been impressed with her at all. Anytime I've played with or against her, she's been like this huge liability, and the cards that get offered when you pick her just aren't very good. At the same time, Nasus is a card which, it's just really hard to trigger Slay a lot. He's a really powerful piece when you can get him going, but he's been a little bit underwhelming. But I think Azir is really strong. I think Renekton has really good stats for a 4-drop, and same thing goes for Sivir. So I think sort of those 3 champions should be really good, but some of the buckets are just so bad. Yeah. I think part of the issue with that is there's the Ascension bucket, which basically is, the keyword for the Buried Sundisk deck, where you try to get your champions to level 3. And just some of the cards that get offered in that bucket, like, even if you're not, drafting that bucket, so it's not getting offered to you as a synergy pick, it's like, just like horrendously bad. Like, you'll get offered the 7 mana card, Ascended's Rise, level up all level 1 Ascended allies, which, levels up your Ascended champion. So Ascended champions are Azir, Renekton, and Nasus. And I've been offered that card when I have none of those units in my deck. And, like, the fact that can happen or take up some of the bucket space, and the fact that if you do pick Azir or Renekton, or sometimes even Nasus, who are all, playable to good champions, and you just start getting offered these cards from the Ascended pool, taking up one of your slots, it can really, really hamper your ability to build a good deck.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that Shurima's a new region. It's a complicated region. It's got a lot of different things going on, and I think it'll take a little bit for Riot to hone in on exactly how the buckets need to be structured there. And so, yeah, I think at the moment from playing it, that they'll probably do an update pretty soon to it, and that'll help. But until then, I'm probably going to wait until they do a bit of an update before I go hard on Shurima too often.
Yeah, I think that's where we should be for now.
All right, should we jump into walking through a draft then?
Yeah, let's do it.
I've popped my screen up. Can you see that?
I can.
Brilliant. All right, so pick 1 of 15. What we're looking at is we have Demacia pack, which has Lucian, Single Combat, and Vanguard Redeemer. We have a Piltover pack, which has Heimerdinger, Death Ray, and Flash of Brilliance. And we have a Targon pack that has Tarek, Mountain Goat, and Tiari the Traveller. So, for me, I mean, Heimerdinger I just really don't like in Expeditions, and so I'm not even really looking, and I don't like Piltover much either, except for Victor, so I'm not looking at that. I quite like Targon, but Tarek is a bit too synergy-based and just not... it's just strong, and I also don't like Tiari much, whereas Lucian's not my favourite Demacian champion. I think it's very difficult to flip in Expeditions. It's just quite easy to deal with, but I really like single combat. I don't mind Vanguard Redeemer, and I really like Demacia, so for me, I feel like that pack's probably what I'm looking to take here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Lucian pack, which is in a Retribution bucket, is probably what I would be picking here. So, like you mentioned, Heimerdinger, not the strongest unit, and Heimerdinger is also coming with a Flash of Brilliance, which I think is a really, really bad card. So that just makes me not want to take that pile, because I don't want to start with a card that's already quite weak in my deck. Yeah. So I would probably take Lucian, and I think Retribution is a Shadow Isles pairing with Demacia, so we might expect to get offered some Shadow Isles cards as we go.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it is. That makes sense. All right, let's grab that. And so our next pack, we have a Shadow Isles with Nocturne, Bark Beast, and Doom Beast. We have a Bilgewater with Misfortune, Jagged Butcher, and Hired Gun. We have a Targon with Zoe, Gift Giver, and Spring Guardian. What are you thinking here?
I think if we're just looking at the cards in the pack, I actually think the Misfortune Scouted Out pack is really good. So we've got a really good 1-drop, we've got a really good 2-drop, we've got a solid 3-drop, which is aggressive and works well with our Lucian and some of the cards we might expect to see there. I think on pure champion power level, I think Zoe is probably the best champion here, but Gift Giver isn't a very good 1-drop, and Spring Guardian isn't a very good 3-drop, so I'm less interested in that pile because of that. In terms of Nocturne, I think Nocturne is good, but I don't really want to play with Nocturne unless I'm also playing with Targon, and we might get offered some Targon, Nightfall cards as we go, but that's probably, not something that I really want to gamble on. So I think I would probably pick the Misfortune and try to go for that scouted out, aggressive, Bilgewater, Demacia archetype. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I like that too. I really like Targon, like you said, and Zoe's really strong, but unfortunately Gift Giver and Spring Guardian are both pretty mediocre. Not particularly looking at Shadow Isles here, and yeah, the scouted out pairs well with Demacia, and we've got a really solid curve of creatures here, which goes well with what we already have. Vanguard Redeemer is really good with 1s and 2-drops that you can trade off and trigger. So I think we'll go with that and then go from there. All right, so we have a pack that has Bayou Brunch and Stalking Broodmother. Stalking Broodmother is a card that I really, really like. Bayou Brunch is an unplayable, so that's a bit of a polarizing one. We have a pack that has Fleet Feather Tracker and Purify. And then we have our final pack, which has Crackshot, Corsair, and Monkey Business. I think initially I'm leaning towards the middle pack here. Fleetweather Tracker's pretty strong. I quite like it. Purify, I'm not really a big fan of, but all these packs have some weak cards. I don't really want to play Monkey Business either. And Bio Brunch is just appalling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'd be picking the Retribution pile. One thing to note on this pick as well is that this is a synergy pick. So the way that the Expedition works, it's going to alternate picks that are, from a random pool of cards. And then it's also going to give us a synergy pick where instead of just giving us a random pool of cards, it'll try and pick factions which complement our strategy or go well with our champions. So that's something to keep in mind, that we do expect these packs to be better than the random packs, and if they're not, we're likely going to end up with a worse than average deck. Just
how is Bayou Brunch in the scouted outs? I don't know, but
yeah, some disappointment right there, yeah.
All right, our next pack, we have Joel Hunters and Slippery Wave Rider. Then we have Ye Be Warned and Pilfered Goods. and finally Radiant Strike and Dragon Guard. So I really like Dragon Guard, particularly because the dragons are quite strong. We haven't got any dragons yet, but even just playing a 3-2 is not appalling, and Radiant Strike is an okay trick. Ye be warned, I don't really want to be playing Pilfered Goods. I'm not a big fan of either. I don't think that card advantage is excessively important in most expedition games I play. Joel Hunters, though, I do quite like, and Slippery Wave Rider is a mediocre card, so I'm maybe leaning Dragon's Descent. What's your thought process here?
I think I would definitely take Smash and Grab here. So that's the Jewel Hunters pack and the Slippery Wave Rider. I think Jewel Hunter is just the single best card we're getting offered out of all 6 of these cards.
Yeah.
It's a powerful challenger. It's going to work, and challengers are going to tend to work out pretty well with Misfortune as well. So if we do end up, one thing to keep in mind when you're drafting your expedition deck is by the time you get to 3 wins, you get 2 more champions added into your deck, and you always get offered a champion that's already in your deck. So we could potentially have 3 Misfortune or 3 Lucian in our deck. So picking cards which work well with those champions early on is a reasonable strategy. So I'm looking for challengers. I'm not really expecting to get that many dragons. We're only going to be offered the Demacia dragons, and we're probably not going to be offered that many of them either. I think Slippery Wave Rider works pretty well with our aggressive strategy as well as a reasonable finisher, which can sort of attack to get us Misfortune stacks later on. So I would probably pick the pile. I would never pick the Ye Be Warned Pilfered Goods pile. And I think Dragon's Descent is decent, but I would probably take Smash and Grab here.
Yeah. No, that I like the sound of that a lot. All right. We've got another Retribution pack, which has Laurent, Duelist, and Silverwing Vanguard. We have a Scouted Out pack that has Sharp Sight and Green Fang Warden, and another Smash and Grab with another Hired Gun and another Slippery Wave Rider. So the Scouted Out pack sticks out to me. Sharp Sight's just one of the strongest spells that Demacia has. Green Fang Warden synergizes with Misfortune, but it isn't really an incredible. It's a pretty weak unit in general, but it fills a spot in the curve. Looking at the first pack, Laurent Duelist is okay. I'm not a big fan of it. Challenger's really strong, but this just isn't the strongest variation of it. And Silverwing Vanguard as well is one where sometimes it lines up really well against your opponent, but it's much better against really aggressive opponents. And in the mid-range matchups, which we typically see in expeditions, I just find that I'm not often impressed with Silverwing. But like, even if I'm killing 2 units, I don't feel like I've really gotten my 4 mana's worth out of it, finishing off those units.
Yeah, agreed. And it's just sort of expensive. Like sometimes you run into an aggro deck that's, a Noxus aggro deck that has lots of copies of Reckless Trifarian, which is a 5/4, and suddenly it's like, well, I'm not even like stopping your aggro deck here.
And like if you're killing like 2 1 or 2 drops, turn 4 is quite slow to be doing that. Your opponent's just going to keep playing units. So yeah,
exactly. And if you have the odd attack token, it's even worse. So I think it's something that's still like playable. Like it's not a bad card, but yeah, it's not a strong pull. I agree with you that the Scouted Out pack with Sharp Sight and Green Fang Warden is what I would take.
Yeah, Hired Gun's pretty good. We don't really want too many more Slippery Wave Riders, but we don't have any tricks yet, so I really like getting that Sharp Sight.
Yeah, Demacia tends to have very good 5-drops as well. That's one of the things that's really strong about the region. Even the sort of more filler level 5-drops, like there's the 5/5 with Tough for 5, or the 5/5 Scout. Those are some of the weaker options in Demacia, and they're still much better than other regions' 5-drops. So, keep that in mind as well, that we don't want to clog up on 5s.
Yeah, that's a really
particularly early on.
I often clog up on 5s. They're just so good.
They're really good, yeah.
So the next pack, we're not going to be picking the Terrors from the Deep. There's a Ruination and an Unspeakable Horror, which would be a very strong pack in a different, more controlling deck, but that's not where we are at the moment. But the next 2 packs are quite interesting. We've got a Strafing Strike paired with a Screeching Dragon, which is a really good combo of cards. And then we have a Remembrance paired with a Fleet Feather Tracker, which is also a really strong collection of cards. So we said at the start that Screeching Dragon's one of our favorite spells. And Strafing Strike is just a more expensive single combat, but single combat's still very good, so paying 1 extra mana is still a pretty good deal. But Remembrance is a really, really strong card in Expeditions, and so I'm having a tough time with this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Remembrance is going to be a little bit weaker in our deck because we do want to have those sort of early game units, so a lot of the time we're not going to have our 3 spell mana banked and be looking to catch up on turn 3. But I do quite like Remembrance, but I think I might lean towards the Strafing Strike Screeching Dragon pack, just because Screeching Dragon is sort of so strong.
It's just so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful as well if we do a run through of the cards we've picked so far, just for the people listening in.
Okay, sure. So we have a Fleet Feather Tracker, we have a Jagged Butcher, we have a Hired Gun, a Lucian, a Purify, a Sharp Sight, Single Combat, Greenfang Warden, Joel Hunters, Misfortune, Strafing Strike, Vanguard Redeemer, Screeching Dragon, and Slippery Wave Rider. And so our curve is very centered. We've got 5 2-drops, 5 3-drops, 2 1-drops, and 2 5-drops. So we're quite aggressive at the moment. And so looking at where we are at the moment, I sort of just want to keep doing what we've been doing. I'd like to get some more 1-drops, I think, so that, we've got so many 2s and 3s. So if we can play a 1-drop as well and apply that pressure from turn 1, I'm really looking for some more tricks. We've only got that 1 Sharp Sight at the moment, so I'd like some more tricks, and then maybe a small amount more at the high end to help us close out games. And I mean, obviously more Screeching Dragons is always good. What are you sort of looking to fill in the gaps here that we've got so far?
Yeah, I agree. I want to sort of solidify some of that synergy, make our early game curve a little bit stronger. And then really we only want to be taking expensive cards if they are premium cards. And that's going to help us a lot. So if we take like a 1-drop and a 2-drop that aren't that good over a medium 5-drop, that means later on, if we end up being, forced to take more 5-drops, we don't get punished as much. So I definitely agree. I'm looking to, get those early drop units when I can.
Yeah, I think the problem I'm seeing at the moment with this deck is closing out and winning the games. And, we don't have Noxious. We're not going to have access to a heap of burn. And so we need to use our creatures really to not just do an initial heap of damage, but then close the game out. And so tricks are one way to do that. Something like, what's the 3-drop that creates the 6 mana spell?
Oh, yeah, Vanguard Sergeant.
Yeah, Vanguard Sergeant's something I'm really looking forward for in these sort of decks, to give you that way to get that final push to get over the line.
Yeah, exactly. And at this point, we're essentially halfway there. We've picked 7 of 15 piles, so we're really starting to see how our deck's going to shape up. So at this point, we basically know for sure we're not a Lucian deck. We're a deck that's playing Lucian, so we're not going to pick up future Lucians. We're not going to be taking picks to try and flip Lucian. That hasn't really come up for us, and we're not going to be able to do that consistently with only 8 buckets left. So at this point, we can either try to build around Misfortune, or to just take generically good cards. Maybe we can pick up a 3rd champion and get 2 copies of that if we get offered something really good. So those are some things to keep in mind, particularly midway through the draft.
Yep. All right, so our next lot of packs we've got a Fleet Feather Tracker paired with a Purify, which I don't really want 2 Purifiers. I'm not that excited by the cards, so I'm not really looking at that. Got a Fleet Feather Tracker paired with a Concerted Strike. I said I wouldn't mind some more 1-drops, and Concerted Strike's quite good, so that's pretty good. And then we've got Confront and paired with a Screeching Dragon. Screeching Dragon loves hanging out with Confront, hey? This is a common dilemma I face.
Yeah, that Confront is just so bad. Otherwise, I'd be really into getting another Screeching Dragon. But I mean, we don't really have units that wear Confront that well. Like Lucian wears it all right because he's got quick attack. But I'm just leaning towards the Fleet Feather Tracker Concerted Strike pile because of that. But if Confront was a different card, I would definitely be at least thinking about another Screeching Dragon.
Yeah, like we can hope that we're offered the opportunity to remove Confront from our deck. If it was a bit later, I would be a bit more inclined, because we would like another Screeching Dragon, but I think with 8 more picks to go, we'll just take the Fleet Feather Tracker and Concerted Strike as a good addition. Right.
Sounds good to me.
Next, we have another Green Fang Warden paired with a Prismatic Barrier. Quite like Prismatic Barrier. Green Fang Warden is very mediocre. We have a Warning Shot, which is a very tough sell, paired with a Prowling Cutthroat, who is fine. And we have a For Demacia, which I don't like as much as the unit that makes a For Demacia, paired with a Vanguard Defender. This is a bit of a mediocre assortment of cards.
Yeah, definitely a mediocre pile. I would probably take the Green Fang Warden Prismatic Barrier. Wouldn't blame you if you took the For Demacia Vanguard Defender, just mostly to have an extra 2-drop unit, because we are lacking in that department right now. But yeah, you just shouldn't take Raiding Party here if your plan is to win. Warning Shot just isn't really a card, even though the Prowling Cutthroat does let you attack and trigger Misfortune pretty consistently.
Yeah, I quite like Prismatic Barrier, so I'm going to take another Green Fang Warden. All right. We've now got a Crackshot Corsair paired with another Sharp Sight. Quite like. Mage Seeker Conservator, which is easily my least favourite card in Expeditions. I hate this card so much. This is just... They could remove this from the game and I'd be so happy. Like, there's nothing I hate more than getting Ruination from a deck that's not playing Shadow Isles just because they hit it off Conservator. It's just the worst.
It is a bad feeling.
Paired with a single combat. That said, I mean, it's a pretty strong card, Conservator, really, but I just hate it. And then we've got Dragon Guard Lookout paired with Prismatic Barrier, which we just don't have anywhere near enough dragons to consistently trigger that, so that's not an option.
Yeah, we've got one, yeah.
I think this might be the Crackshot Corsair and Sharp Sight. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Crackshot Corsair and Sharp Sight pack, like, it's comparable to the Mage Seeker single combat. Like, you get a 1-drop unit and a pretty good 2-drop spell, but I think given what we've got so far, that Sharp Sight is probably going to be better than a single combat. And, you know, we are looking to be somewhat aggressive, so I think the Corsair is going to work better than the Mage Seeker.
Yeah, I think it's important, particularly in Expeditions, to really analyse how good, not just the objective power level of cards, like single combat's one of the strongest Demacia spells and has been since beta for the game, but in our deck, we don't have many units that we want to be single combating on, and so... and we already have single combat and strafing strikes, so it's not something I really want to pick up here, as opposed to Sharp Sight, where we've got a lot of units that really want to be sharp-sighted, and so that's much more appealing here. All right. Oh, this is another one that I love complaining about cards that I hate seeing in Expeditions. I don't get to do this very often, so that's fun. Mobilize. I hate Mobilize. For those that you probably don't even know what Mobilize does, it's a 3-mana burst spell that reduces the cost of all allies in your hand by 1. So
such a trap.
You pay 3 mana and have no impact on the game, which is not really strong. Green Fang Warden, if we wanted our third Green Fang Warden, we're good to go. Another Dragon Guard Lookout paired with a single combat, so I'm hoping that the third pack's looking pretty good. And, we've got Yordle Grifter, who we currently have 6 Bilgewater and 14 Demacia cards. And Yordle Grifter's paired with Yebi Warned. Oh, this is unfortunate.
Yeah, this is pretty rough. We're at a point where none of these buckets look good. Each bucket has at least one card, which is, very bad. Yebi Warned isn't great. Yordle Grifter is just like it's just not going to hit that often. If it hits, our opponent is allowed to be tilted. We'll let that float. I think Mobilize is just unplayable, especially given what we've got so far. Dragon Guard Lookout, it's a 6-mana 3/5, so I'm not super into that. But I mean, we have 1 dragon, and single combat is quite good. So I think I'm leaning towards that pile, given the other 2 are terrible. But I don't feel good about it. Where are you at, Maitland?
Yeah, I'm taking that. This doesn't feel like a 7-win deck to me at the moment.
That's not a 7-win attitude though. So can we blame the deck?
So next pack, we've got a Jagged Butcher paired with a Make It Rain, which is pretty reasonable. We've got another Dragon Guard Lookout paired with a Confront.
Okay.
And we have an Egghead Researcher, which is not one of the cards we mentioned yet, but it's it's a very, very powerful Demacia common paired with a Laurent Duelist.
Yeah, this is a tough pack. I think So we've 100% ruled out the Dragon Guard and Confront pack. We're just never taking that. It's so much worse than the other packs. So now we've narrowed it down to 2 packs. So Jagged Butcher, Make It Rain. The Butcher's strong. We really would like to get more 1-drops. And the Make It Rain is fine. So it's not great, but it does let us do a few things that we can't do yet. So, I mean, it's a reasonable card. We can get rid of opponents' barriers. Sometimes opponents will have a lot of X1s. So, like, it's not a bad card. It's not a premium card, though. Then looking at Retribution, I think Egghead Researcher is, really good. It's going to make our Dragon Guard a little bit stronger as well.
It will.
Laurent Duelist is just really not that great of a card, though. So that makes me not excited there. So, honestly, I think this pack is a similar power level to the Jagged Butcher Make It Rain pack. What do you think, Maitland?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning more towards Retribution, but I'm wondering if we do have to take the Jagged Butcher and just try and be a bit more aggressive, just because we are looking so weak at the moment, and so maybe we just try to end games as fast as possible.
Yeah. Honestly, I could see just taking the Retribution pack. Like, we need more, like, I guess, it does come down to how aggressive we're going to be, but,
Yeah, I think I'm going to take the Butcher, but,
okay.
It's pretty close. All right, we've finally been offered a Senna, Sentinel of Light, which obviously goes well with our Lucian, and it's just a good 3-drop in general. Paired with another Greenfang Warden. Jesus, there's a lot of those. We have a Pool Shark paired with a Shell Shocker, which is very unimpressive 1-drops. And we have a Mage Seeker Conservator paired with a Purify.
Yeah, you're gonna hate me for saying this, but I want to take those unimpressive 1-drops. I think. Yeah, I think Pool Shark is reasonable later on, and I think Shell Shocker, just having a 2-mana 2/1 that gives us a little mana discount, is probably pretty decent. Like, I don't think we need any more 3-drops. We certainly don't need any more Green Fang Wardens. So while that Senna is a little bit appealing, I'm not too interested. And then, Mage Seeker Conservator, pretty good 1-drop, but I'm just not into running a second Purify. So I'd probably go for the more sort of aggressive 1-drops in Spellslingers.
Yeah, I really like that. We can't afford to put a second Purify in our deck. And we already have a lot of 3-drops, and the 1-drops do really help, even if one of them we don't want to cast on turn 1. Okay, we have a Jagged Butcher with a Boxtopus, some okay creatures. We have a Senna, Sentinel of Light paired with a Radiant Guardian. Hello, I'm listening. And then we have a Ranger's Resolve paired with a Stalking Broodmother. So here, I really like Senna. I really like Radiant Guardian. We haven't ended up with too many 5-drops yet, so I feel pretty strongly I want to take this pack. Jagged Butcher, we'd definitely like another one. Boxtopus, we're not super excited about. And Ranger's Resolve is pretty reasonable. Stalking Broodmother's pretty good, but I think the Retribution goes a bit better with what we have than a 7-drop and a 1-drop trick.
Yeah, I agree about not taking that 1-drop, 7-drop pack. I think the other 2 packs outclass it a fair bit. My sort of first instinct would be to probably take the Jagged Butcher Boxtopus pack, but I think you're a bit higher on Radiant Guardian than I am, and I'd be willing to see how that Radiant Guardian goes. Oh,
you're not a Radiant Guardian fan?
I mean, I just feel like there are so many good 5-drops, and a lot of the time it doesn't really come down to life total in a lot of these games. So while I think Radiant Guardian is a solid card, it's not like if there was a Screeching Dragon or a Radiant Guardian, I don't know if I'd like snap take Radiant Guardian,
Oh, I'm not saying it's necessarily better than Screeching Dragon, but Screeching Dragon is busted.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe we do just want another 1-drop and just to be more aggressive. Yeah, I can see that. All right, up to the second last pack, and we've been offered a Tiana Crown Guard paired with an Honored Lord, which I'm not sure if... we can I guess use Hired Gun to trigger that. It seems to be our only way to trigger Honored Lord. We have a Bright Steel Protector paired with a Laurent Duelist, and we have a Boxtopus paired with a Make It Rain.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward. There are definitely cards here that, we would want to play, but the fact that, like, the way the groupings work, we're not necessarily getting two cards that we really want to play. So
Yeah.
I think Bright Steel Protector could be reasonable, but the Laurent Duelist we don't really want. And then Boxtopus Make It Rain is decent. All of these feel pretty medium. I could even see taking the Tiana Crown Guard pack as sort of a big finisher and just, a 2-mana 3/2 that might make the opponent nervous. But yeah, what are you feeling here, Maitland?
Yeah, we've got two Fleet Feather Trackers, which are really good with the Bright Steel Protector. So
yeah,
I think that's
honestly,
what
I think that's I think that's
leaning
a good call.
towards. I just think that Tiana, when we get to turn 8, we've lost, right? Like,
no, I think you still have a reasonable amount of staying power and can sort of win some of those games. So I wouldn't say we've lost, but
it's not looking good.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take the Bright Steel Protector to try and maximize that early game synergy. And now we'll go to the 15th, which is a trade pick. We've been offered the option to trade our Dragon Guard Lookout, which is really the glue that holds our deck together, for a Screeching Dragon. We can trade a Pool Shark for a Concerted Strike, or a Make It Rain for a Loyal Badger Bear.
So, before we make this choice, what's sort of your philosophy when you end up on a trade screen? What are you thinking? How do you make your decisions here?
Yep, so there's a number of factors. The first one really is, what are the worst cards in my deck? And I'm looking for... So the left column, I'm looking to see which are the worst cards here, the cards that are really detrimental to my strategy. So when we look here, Dragon Guard Lookout does essentially nothing in our deck. It's definitely one of the worst cards. It has very little synergy. We're very rarely activating it. And Pool Shark and Make It Rain, I don't really like either. Pool Shark, I don't mind. But Dragon Guard Lookout is definitely one of the cards that I would be most hoping came up in a trade. So that's a really big plus. And then on the right side, I'm looking for what are the best cards here. And so one of the things that you're sort of looking for is to maximize that delta between the card you're removing and the card that you're adding. You're trying to get the strongest, the biggest gap so that you've made your deck better the most amount. But it's not just that, because there'll be times when a card is just so bad that getting a mediocre card is something I'd rather than getting a really, really strong card for my deck. So I'm trying to weigh up those different factors. I imagine that's probably pretty similar to what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's basically my strategy as well. And I think this is somewhere where it can be useful to put a number value on cards as well. And like you said, I think maximizing that delta, that difference between card value is really strong. So sometimes you might be offered the best possible card for your deck. It's a 10 for your deck, but you have to swap a 9 for it. And your other option is to swap, a 2 for a 4. And, in that spot, okay, if it's the literal best card you can get for your deck, I'd probably make that swap. But, a lot of the time you just want to swap that 2 for a 4, make your deck that little bit better instead of making, most of the time you want to focus on making your worst cards better rather than making your best cards better. Because when you've drawn your best cards, you're in a good position. You've drawn that card. By swapping it out for another really good card, if you ever draw it, you still would have just drawn a really good card. So keep that in mind, that you want to improve the value of those negative cards. And I think this particular pick, it isn't that close. We've, like you said, Dragon Guard Lieutenant, one of the worst cards in our deck, being swapped for a Screeching Dragon, which would, potentially be one of the stronger cards in our deck, one of the cards that would let us fight past turn 8.
What I'm sort of trying to think about is, if I made each one of these picks and then played 1,000 games, what would be the effect that has on my win rate? And so you're trying to sort of maximize that. I guess in some situations when your deck is sort of really bad or really high variance, you're trying to just maximize the opportunities. But in general, I'm just trying to say, if I played 1,000 games, what would the effect that this change has? And I think that, swapping Dragon Guard Lieutenant for Screeching Dragon is just easily going to have a gigantic impact on our win rate. And so that's definitely the pick I'm making here.
Yeah, agreed. Because honestly, all three of those picks were good.
Yeah.
I think they were all good options for us. So, if we were only offered one of, each of those picks individually, like we would have just taken them all. So that can sometimes make it tricky, but, breaking it down and thinking through the consequences of each pick can make it more clear which you should take.
Yeah. All right. And so we've done that draft. That was a real life example of us going through a draft, the sort of thought processes we use, the sort of things we're thinking about and weighing up, and the factors we take into account. So hopefully, the two things that you got some stuff from this ep, you learned some things, you got an insight into how we approach expeditions, and hopefully that was enjoyable and interesting to you.
I think, maybe as well. What if you had to guess, how many wins do you think you would get with this deck?
I don't love this deck, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe let's go through one by, where did we end up for the listeners at home?
So we ended up on Crackshot Corsair, 2 copies of Fleet Feather Tracker, 3 copies of Jagged Butcher, 1 Pool Shark, 1 Spell Shocker, 1 Boxtopus, 1 Bright Steel Protector, 1 Hired Gun, 1 Lucian, 1 Purify, 2 Sharp Sight, 2 Single Combat, 2 Greenfang Warden, 1 Jawl Hunters, 3 Laurent Duelist, 1 Laurent Duelist, 1 Misfortune, 1 Prismatic Barrier, 1 Strafing Strike, Vanguard Redeemer, Concerted Strike, 2 Screeching Dragons, and a Slippery Wave Rider. And I think we're just going to play out a bunch of mediocre creatures, trade off a bit, and then just sort of peter out. We don't have any real ways to turn the corner, close the door, and finish games. We're not doing anything particularly impressive. I'm thinking maybe sort of 2 to 3 wins.
Okay. Yeah. I would probably... I would think maybe somewhere in the 4 to 6 range would be reasonable for this. I would be looking to, in future champion picks, get Misfortune, get more, aggressive cards if possible, make some of those swaps. I think this deck can do some powerful things, particularly if the champions just get to sit on the back line and survive for a really long time. If the opponent has bad removal, they're going to have to make trades or, block our units. So I could see us picking up some wins that way. And this definitely feels like a deck that does get much stronger when you've got more reliable access to your champions like Misfortune. So this sometimes happens with decks like Teemo decks, for instance, as well. Wins 1 and 2 are a lot harder than potentially wins 4 and 5 because, you only have 1 copy of Teemo versus having 3.
Yeah, and we just don't have the good enablers. I think like Misfortune, we're just sort of hoping to naturally flip. Sure, we've got the Green Fang Wardens as scout champions, scout allies, but it just feels like we're going to be a bit slow. But we'll see how it goes, and I'll probably tweet from Twitter how I end up going with this deck. Maybe I won't, in which case you can presume it was probably 0 to 1 wins. But yeah, cool. So that was a bit of fun. I guess do we want to have a chat about outside Runeterra stuff? What's happening?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm just so focused on this expedition.
I've just been getting absolutely pummeled by work the last week, so I don't really know which way is up or down at the moment. But I'm very excited for new music tomorrow. Brockhampton have a new album coming out, which I'm really interested for, and Taylor Swift is dropping the re-recorded version of Fearless, which I'm really excited for. I've liked the tracks that have been coming out from that. I think that one of her weaknesses from that era is the production wasn't as strong, and the production's much better on these ones. The drums are just really hitting, which is I'm a big fan of. So I'll definitely be giving that a listen tomorrow, and that'll be really good.
Very nice.
Do you have anything else?
No, I think you've covered it. I'm really keen for this release also.
I'm at a really funny spot where when Fearless by Taylor Swift first came out, I was a big musician and real music nerd, a real music snob, just a real intolerable sort of person that was really judgy about what music people listened to. And my girlfriend at the time was really into Fearless, the Taylor Swift album, and I'd that was really tough for me to reconcile with. It was really hard because it was such boring, basic, normie music. And now I'm much more open and just a reasonable person in general, and I really enjoy pop music and all kinds of music now. And so, and part of getting into pop music was sort of going back to all the music that I've ignored over my life and appreciating it a bit more. And so I'm really excited for this album to come out that when it was first released, I was very, very mocking and rude about, and now I'm just really excited to hear it.
You get your second chance, yeah. Your shot for redemption.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for listening again. Let us know if you'd like us to do more expedition content, if you thought the sort of structure of us walking through an expedition worked or was just absolutely unlistenable, in which case it's funny that you made it this far, but good on you for persevering. We really appreciate it. As always, follow us on Twitter, check out the Discord, and we will see you on the ladder.
Catch ya.